Good morning and welcome to the Megacast, our live local TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today is not a good day. On Monday evening, just after 8 p.m., a 43-year-old man opened fire at students at Michigan State University at Berkey Hall, just before moving on to the MSU Union building down the street, before he made his way on the run, prior to being approached by local law enforcement and turning the weapon on himself in the night, ending his life and ending an horrific day at MSU. As it stands, 3 people are dead and 5 are hospitalized at Sparrow Hospital in the Lansing area in unknown condition. Resources are available to the MSU community on campus at the Hanna Center located at 819 Abbott Road in East Lansing. A link to more information is in the top story on our local news page on civiccentertv.com for you and yours at Michigan State, as last night's tragedy hits home, not just here in the state of Michigan, but also in our local area where we originate our broadcast in Oakland County. A statement from Representative Noah Arbit, a newly inaugurated this past January representative in the state legislature, saying, quote, "Tonight the MSU community has suffered severe loss and trauma. My heart is with each and every person on campus in East Lansing and all of those across Michigan who love a Spartan. As a policymaker, my first inclination is to discuss policies and reforms because it is the only answer I have to the question of how can I help. To many constituents across West Bloomfield, Commerce, and the Lakes area who have already begun to communicate with me on these reforms, let me assure you the Michigan legislature will act. Soon I will move heaven and earth to pass critical gun safety legislation up to and including an assault weapons ban in the state of Michigan. Never again in the state of Michigan will we suffer this kind of mass shooting. Duty and conscience compel us to act swiftly, decisively, and without regard to partisanship in order to protect our communities from the savage terror of gun violence. In the name of all of those who we lost tonight and those we have lost in Michigan to gun violence, we cannot fail." Then there is a brief sentence in Hebrew that is attached to his statement, in which Representative Arbit then continues on. "May all the memories of those who perished be a blessing to all of those who knew and loved them, and may their memories be a revolution to finally compel change once and for all." And so we begin. We begin the aftermath, the time for coping, the time for mourning. Why? Why, once again, are we at this point? We ask ourselves that every time there is a school shooting, whether it's in Michigan, whether it's in another location, whether it's a school shooting or just a regular run-of-the-mill mass shooting at a local event, at a concert, in the public square, at an elementary school. Before we speak on going forward, let's begin with where we are here and now, with stories of hope, stories of help, and people helping each other on the night of the event, navigate from place to place, from shelter to shelter, staying quiet, staying where they were, sheltering in place. Students helping each other, first responders from across the state of Michigan, rushing to the scene in East Lansing to provide help and to bring a safe end to this tragedy as soon as possible. Those are the stories we want to remember from last night. Unfortunately, there are stories we want to remember, and there are stories we have to remember when these sorts of shootings go down. But above all else, we can take from these events the need to be there for other people, to listen, to lead with our hearts, and help each other through this tragedy. Because while it may have happened at Michigan State University, it may have happened to the Spartan community specifically, today we are all Spartans. We're Michiganders. More importantly, we're human beings. And in these times of tragedy, sometimes that gets lost in translation when we talk about policy and we talk about action and we talk about being tired of these kinds of events. But ultimately, these kinds of events cannot keep happening. We can't allow them to keep happening. I'm not going to make this about me, but trust me, this is all going somewhere as I veer a little bit off the beaten path here for a moment and think about what happened on campus at my alma mater at Michigan State. I had many an experience on that campus at the point where these shootings happened, both at the MSU Union, where I had several classes and study groups and met up with my friends and had quite a few matches in the bowling alley as well at MSU Union in the basement, as well as Berkey Hall, where I met one of the more profound professors in my time at Michigan State University, who also was gone too soon during that semester. It's about running on campus to things that are exciting and are happy memories. I think about being at the Breslin Center with my friends from 2 South Phillips when Michigan State defeated Louisville and advanced in the NCAA tournament. And we ran from the Breslin Center to a nearby parking lot so we could cram into a tiny sedan and drive north on campus towards Cedar Village, where many of those friends lived, to witness the usual shenanigans on campus at Michigan State, just off campus in Cedar Village, often involving misuse of furniture, but that's another conversation for another day. Those are the things that our students should be running towards. They should be running towards things in happiness, in excitement, making memories. Memories that should last them a lifetime, not have to last them a lifetime. They should be running toward, not running from. Instead of running to something fun, instead of making memories at the MSU Union, instead, they're making things they want to forget. This is where we are. This is where we're at in our society. Once again, we're at the crossroads of making a decision or making statements. So what are we going to do? As individuals, what are you going to do? As an individual, what am I going to do? As someone with a platform, what can I do? Speak to you. Speak to our leaders. Speak to people in our community that are affected by this to tell their stories. But there's something that we all can do too, and that's call on our leaders to step up. I'm not going to get political about this. I'm not going to take one side or the other, because the only side that is important is the side of the victims and those affected by the shooting at Michigan State. I'm calling on our leaders, as we all should be, to take action together. That's what leaders do. Step up or step down. Because when you're a leader, when you agree to be a leader, when you put yourself in that position, you put yourself in a position to make tough decisions, to be creative, to put your ego aside and do what's right for the greater good. That's not Republican or Democrat. That's not right or left. That's not liberal or conservative. That's just being a leader. So whether or not you support gun reform or not, whether you believe this is a gun issue, a gun rights issue, or a mental health issue, or heck, maybe we just call it both for once. It's time to find solutions, not point fingers. Let's start there, leaders. Step up or step down. And so now we recover. We help each other, and maybe, just maybe this time, we'll do the right thing. We'll come together. We'll put our egos, we'll put our opinions, we'll put our political stances aside and help each other recover and then prevent in the future, because that's the Spartans' will. We'll be right back.
Many people are feeling overwhelmed and struggling with mental wellness these days. So be kind to your mind. Give yourself permission to breathe. Share your feelings. You are not alone. Have hope. Talk to a Stay Well counselor for free confidential help 24/7 through the COVID-19 hotline.
Welcome back to the Megacast. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can find more information about our program and keep up to date with us on civiccentertv.com on our Megacast page, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, as we continue to react and to tell the stories of people at Michigan State University and in the Michigan State community. We begin our recovery process. Again, resources for those in the MSU community, especially those students, staff, and faculty in the immediate area who are affected by this tragedy, can be found beginning today at the Hannah Center, just off campus at 819 Abbott Road in East Lansing. On our website, on our local news page, our top story today does have a link at the very bottom that goes directly to MSU's website that provides exact information and examples of some of those resources that are being provided to the Michigan State community. And as we think about recovery, we got to think about it from a number of different angles and a number of different perspectives, as it was not just students, staff, and faculty that were affected, but also the greater community, alumni, witnesses, people from across the state of Michigan, and our first responders as well. Joining us now to talk about how we can begin that coping process is Dr. Melanie Schwartz from Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness. Dr. Schwartz, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking time to be with us today as we once again are at a point we've been at before in our communities here. Certainly we think about back in November of 2021 in the wake of the shooting at Oxford High School, and we think about even recent events with threats being made to several schools across the state of Michigan. And it's a traumatic event for anybody that's involved, whether they were at the scene of any of these shootings, sheltering in place, a parent from afar, and a first responder. So where should we start in terms of helping each other recover and begin to cope with the events of Monday night in East Lansing?
Well, I can't believe we're here again and we're having this conversation again. I feel like we were just doing this. Um, you know, Really, the number one predictor of people getting through trauma is community. And so making sure, and I've seen it, I saw it last night, I'm seeing it this morning, I see it on social media, I see it on the news, I see it just personally, reaching out to everyone you know right now. And people are offering, people in Lansing are offering, hey, if your kids don't want to be on campus, send them to my house. I'm okay with that. How are you doing? Were you affected by this? What can I do for you? And I think that is where we start, is just letting people know that you're there and that you are willing to help.
And for those on campus, for students, some who may have been affected in many different ways than others, being there for your fellow student can be a really important first step because you are in that close proximity. You do have that shared experience with them. And so,
Yes.
but it's also important for those students too to focus on their own recovery and their own coping in this situation too, because everyone's going to be affected in a different
100.
way. So for those students that want to help each other but are also going to be coping themselves, what is your advice for them on how they can manage both simultaneously, or if they should be managing both simultaneously?
They 100% should be talking to someone right now. Okay, all of the resources that are available at Michigan State right now, or a lot of students do have their own personal therapists. I reached out last night to all of my clients at MSU and families who have students at MSU, and just said, I'm here for you, whatever you need. Make sure your kids are talking. I cannot stress the importance of, just even if you feel like it's not affecting you, it is, and just getting it out and talking about it is the first step in getting through all of this.
And then from a parent's perspective too, their kids were at various parts of the campus last night during the events of the shooting, from the initial shootings at Berkey Hall and at the MSU Union to throughout the reports of shootings at various places across campus, real or not, in those moments, and especially given the lockdown of the campus and all that went on last night, parents also are going to be heavily involved in this recovery too, and they need their own recovery. So for parents, what is your advice on where they should start, both in coping with their child being in harm's way potentially last night, but also helping them provide whatever resources they need or support that their kids may need to work through this step by step?
Well, I think number one, parents are going to need to talk just as much as the kids are. I mean, it was traumatic for the parents. I mean, going through it, because they didn't know if their kids were safe, or not knowing what was happening. Obviously everybody was holding on to whatever information they could get, but there was so much information going on, some true, some not, that, that increased the stress of everybody. So I think it's important for the parents also to have their community to do some research online, or with the schools, or with their own resources, to learn how to work with their kids who have now endured a trauma. So they need to help themselves. They also need to help their kids and be strong for their kids. Their kids are resilient. They will get through this, but it's going to be a process. And as long as they're on top of it and they are proactive about it, then everyone will get through this the way that they need to.
Peter Sagal from NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me had a really interesting tweet that caught my eye last night. It was, quote, just sent a text to a friend in East Lansing where there's an active shooter saying, are you safe? And realized she did the same thing for me when it happened in my town in July. And we think about that from a local perspective too. Many students that were at Oxford High School in November of 2021 are now students at Michigan State. We heard stories last night of a couple of students who spoke with local news outlets from Detroit and from the Lansing area as well, who had just started at MSU in January at the beginning of the second semester of the regular proper school year, and once again are thrust back into that situation. So from a professional perspective, what is if there's a protocol or if there's a certain way that you go about addressing that from someone that already has this sort of traumatic experience and has been in recovery for that for almost 2 years at this point, a little over a year and a half at this point, and now is in a similar situation at a place where they're separated from where they were previously at the first incident?
Mm-hmm. I mean, unfortunately, we have zero control over the things that happen around us. Yeah. And hopefully in treatment and recovery of what they've already been working on, they've learned that things may happen. I mean, obviously it's a 1 in a billion chance that someone's going to endure this more than once in their lifetime. But it has happened now. And hopefully they're already in treatment, continuing in treatment, and this will just be the next step of their recovery to work on this. But, this is the time for those communities and those families to really, be around those students and really keep watch over them and do what they need to do to make sure that the recovery for those students who have unfortunately had to go through this more than once continue to work on their traumas and how to get through it.
And these situations too, we'd be remiss if we don't also think about those that responded to this tragedy. Certainly the police officers and the EMS that were on site from Michigan State University Police and Public Safety, as well as from local EMS, but also from departments that were in the immediate area and surrounding areas. I think about even my cousin who works for Livingston County EMS was also and lives in the Lansing area, was also called in to respond to this. You work with law enforcement on mental health matters and providing counseling to police officers in West Bloomfield. Speak to us about counseling for these individuals who see these sort of situations all the time. It's unfortunately in some cases par for the course in their career field, but that doesn't make that any easier each time it happens for them.
They do look at it a little differently than we do. I say to them all the time that, our witnessing of trauma versus their witnessing of trauma look different because they're more immune to it because they do see it way more frequently than we do. However, I do educate them on the importance of how it does impact them and the importance of being able to work through it. I'm hoping that the different departments that were involved last night do have their own crisis intervention that they have brought into place to work through what they went through last night. That's what crisis intervention stress management was developed for, was for that type of situation where the departments, or even for MSU now, the students will also go through crisis intervention stress management interventions right now to manage the initial crisis outcome of what's going on with them. So I'm hoping that the departments do that. Most of them are trained in it. A lot of the departments also have peer support teams to help with that as well. So that's my guess is what will happen. And then, the kind of state of the departments is changing a little bit, and many more of the police officers or first responders are reaching out for therapy services at this point as well. And so hopefully they will work with their therapist on it as well.
We're joined by Dr. Melanie Schwartz on today's edition of the Megacast. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness, and also works very closely with the West Bloomfield Police Department, providing counseling services to local law enforcement and first responders in the West Bloomfield community. And Dr. Schwartz, just to go back to the general sense of counseling and addressing these sorts of situations for people across the board, it is so complicated because trauma affects people in a number of different ways. It hits people differently based on proximity, based on their past experiences, based on their natural fight or flight responses, and so many other factors. So For mental health professionals like yourself, what are you considering? What are you looking for? What are you putting together as you're planning to help individuals who have been a witness to a tragedy like this, who have been a victim of a tragedy like this, who are connected to someone who's been unfortunately involved in such a tragedy, to help them through a variety of different outcomes that can come from something like this?
Unfortunately, I feel like, at least Viewpoint, and I know probably across the board, we have all had to become trauma therapists over the last couple of years. And so we have really worked on specializing and working on our training in trauma and grief because of these repeated incidents that continue to happen, and the more and more clients that do come in who are dealing with trauma and grief. So I would say that unfortunately it's become the norm for us in how we treat our clients, is because that's what we're dealing with. That's who's walking in the door. That's what we're seeing in the country, in the community. And so we use our skills and our interventions that we've learned and that, we work with on a daily basis at this point.
And in terms of how this trauma may manifest, there's a number of different ways. Again, it goes back to just the many factors that go into how trauma affects one person versus another. But for those that may suffer in silence, which happens very often, whether it's in a traumatic situation like this or another mental health ailment that someone may be suffering from over time, what should people be looking out for those that may be suffering in silence here and may show some signs, some quieter signs of a traumatic effect from this event?
Okay. Well, it can really be anything, unfortunately. I mean, we could see anxiety. You can see somebody, having increased fears, not sleeping well, having nightmares, having flashbacks, which are just moments that kind of flash in front of you of the experience where you feel like you're in it. Um, you know, uh, Quicker heightened reaction to things, more irritability, avoidance of different situations. You might start to see some depression symptoms where people are isolating from things, they're losing interest, their mood has changed, they're more sad, they're more quiet. You may even start to see some suicidal thinking that comes from this. Change in appetite, change in just overall behavior or just patterns. So it's hard to kind of limit it to a small set of symptoms because it could be pretty much anything that you could see. It's just, if you are noticing anything different in, friends, family, please, take the initiative to reach out to a professional who can help navigate this and figure out what's going on.
More information and resources to get in contact with Viewpoint Psychology and Wellness and their offices across our local area can be found on their website, viewpointpw.com, or call them 248-669-9500, 248-669-9500, and again, their website, viewpointpw.com. In terms of going back also to the law enforcement side of things, what should departments be doing to check in on those that may have been responding, whether it's police, fire, EMS, regardless? Not every department necessarily has those counseling resources right on hand or regularly in use in their particular department, but in that case that they don't, and they want to check in on these professionals that did respond and did provide such a swift and ultimately successful response and neutralizing the situation. How should they be going about that? What should they be looking for?
What I've learned over my work with law enforcement and first responders is that everybody knows people from other departments. And if you know somebody from one of these departments, please reach out to them. Again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, is just community right now, and support is the most important, and just reach out to the people were involved. Doesn't matter if they were a first responder, if they were a student, family, professor, whoever it was, just reach out to them and say, hey, what can I do to help right now? And do you need any help? Do you need any support? What do you need? And that goes just across the board for any human that was involved in any of this.
Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this unfortunate situation and all the really complicated issues that go into just responding to this on a basic level and helping people in the initial phases, but also as this goes on, because a trauma on one day isn't a trauma on one day at all. Any lasting thoughts or advice that you'd like to give to our audience, to those in the MSU community and those connected to it, those that have witnessed through the news or from on site about what happened in East Lansing on Monday and how they can recover?
I think, I said it across our interview today, just talk. Okay. Just make sure you're talking about it, making sure that you're using self-care with yourself, whatever that looks like. If, students need to leave campus right now and go home for a while, go home. Okay. Professors, whatever, just go home, get a break from it, be in your safe place wherever you need to be, and do what you need to do to recover from this. But please, please, please just be talking about it. Do not keep it in. Do not isolate. Do not try and deal with it on your own. This is not something that we know how to deal with on our own. So please don't try.
Again, resources are available through Michigan State University. They will be at the Hanna Center, and that's already underway. It began at 9 a.m. on Tuesday at the Hanna Center and going forward, 819 Abbott Road in East Lansing. A link to more information directly from Michigan State University on these resources and how you can tap into these resources for yourself, for your kids, for your colleagues through MSU and more can be found at the bottom of our first article on our website, civiccentertv.com, on our local news page. We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll tackle this from the legislative point of view. Joining us next will be Representative Brenda Carter from Michigan's 53rd Congressional District at the state level, and also the co-chair of the Michigan Firearms Safety and Violence Prevention Caucus. That's coming up next. Stay tuned. This is the Megacast.
Ronnie started doing prescription pills at the age of 15, and by 19, he died. If your child is struggling with drug use, try not to be too proud to reach out for help. Don't be worried about what the neighbor will think or your family. Just get your child the help they need. Sometimes it's the hard road to take, but the hard road is nothing compared to living with the fact that your child is no longer with you.
There's hope and help at drugfree.org.
When you have a gambling problem, you have a money problem. Don't let your gambling cause you financial hardship. If you or someone you love is struggling with gambling, we can help. Get free confidential counseling and win your life back. Learn more at michigan.gov/problemgambling.
Welcome back to the Megacast. I'm Tyler Keefe. You can keep up to date with us and find all of our full shows, as well as each individual segment on demand, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, and also find out all the different places that we are broadcasting live each and every day, and especially on much happier days than today. Again, on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Our next guest is Representative Brenda Carter, representing Michigan's 53rd Congressional District out of Pontiac, a Democrat, who is also the co-chair of the Michigan Firearms Safety and Violence Prevention Caucus. Representative Carter, appreciate you joining us today, albeit wishing it was under better circumstances.
Tyler, thank you for inviting me today.
So first off, I just want to inquire about your initial reaction when you received the news last night, initially out of East Lansing, when this tragedy began just shortly before 8:30 last night.
Tyler, as an alum of Michigan State University, walking from Berkeley over to the U, many times being over in the Union Hall, I was total disbelief and then disgust, because we have been working so very hard with the caucus to ensure that another Oxford didn't happen in Michigan again. And unfortunately, we go through this trauma. I'm here in Lansing right now, and my colleagues are just in deep remorse because this is a situation that we could have done something about.
And so let's dive into that a little bit deeper. Again, you're the co-chair of the Michigan Firearms Safety and Violence Prevention Caucus. Talk about how that group came together and what work they are doing or continue to do it, and the discussions that they're having at the legislative level to attempt to bring some of this legislation forward and maybe try to find a legislative and a policy solution to some of these issues that keep popping up across the U.S., including, unfortunately, here in Michigan, multiple incidences in the last 2 years.
And Tyler, thank you for asking that. Senator Rosemary Bear and I, we both shared a similar district or similar in a community of Pontiac. Senator Bear experienced suicides in her family, and unfortunately for me, I lost a son and a nephew to gun violence. Or my son, he died a year later after being a victim of gun violence. So it's very, very personal for us. But we started this about 2 years ago. And during that time, we watched gun violence escalate, not only in Michigan in our urban centers, but across the nation with unfortunate shootings like in Buffalo and Uvalde. You know, we just felt that we needed to do something. So we were working under a different majority at that time, but we had bills that we knew that if we were able to pass those bills, the situations like East Lansing would not have occurred. So that's how we started. That's why we started. And that's why we are working with urgency, with a sense of urgency now to make sure that an event like this doesn't happen in Michigan again.
And it's sad because when these things happen, we try to connect them to what we know, to what we've already experienced, and try to learn from that point. And it's tough not to connect the shooting at Michigan State University last night to the Oxford High School shooting in November of 2021. And again, calls for progress, calls for change immediately at the beginning of the shooting last night and all the way throughout the unfortunate end, with 3 deaths and 5 others hospitalized in Sparrow Health System right now in the Lansing area. So from someone that's been in the legislature, it was in the legislature during that time of the Oxford High School shooting and is in the legislature even now in the wake of the shooting at Michigan State, what progress, if any, has been made in Lansing on this issue in those last almost 2 years?
Well, unfortunately I have to state in the last session, the last 2 years of the session, no progress was made. None. We submitted the bills. We never got a hearing. It was just like it didn't even matter. But now we have an opportunity for huge change. And if you were able to listen to the governor's State of the State address, she highlighted 3 areas that she thought would be very, very important to pass into law this session as quickly as possible. And those were safe storage, background checks, and red flag laws. Now, these laws are very important because if any of these laws had been in place, maybe, just maybe, particularly with the red flag law, maybe East Lansing would not have occurred. So what's the difference now between the previous session? We truly have an opportunity to implement common sense gun reform. We're not talking about violating anybody's Second Amendment rights. We're talking about putting common sense reform legislation in place that we can mitigate and deter incidents like what happened last night.
Representative Brenda Carter is with us on today's edition of the Megacast, a Democrat from the city of Pontiac, representing Michigan's 53rd congressional district in the House of Representatives. And as you mentioned, that is a common phrase we hear, particularly from the Democratic Party when discussing issues of gun violence in our country and here in the state of Michigan. They say common sense gun reform or common sense gun control. Define that for us. That's a pretty broad term and often isn't really broken down too much by our leaders when they mention it. So break it down for us, Representative.
What we mean is that there's an argument out there that any reform would take away or violate Second Amendment rights for responsible gun owners. That is not the case. We're looking at things that if we know that someone has a background history of violence and gun violence, putting something in place to kind of mitigate that, to stop that. Or if we know that there's a history of a person having domestic violence issues, then maybe we should have something in place that will flag those incidents that person has. It's looking at what the history of the person is doing and putting some safe checks in place. Our gun owners out there who use it for recreation, that loves and respects the law, we're not concerned with them. We're concerned with the young man who went out to Michigan State and for whatever reason took the lives of 3 people and injured 5. These are the people we're talking about. Common sense. It's common sense to know that if you purchase a gun without a waiting period, that it's a possibility that something may happen, especially if you haven't been flagged. Okay, so these are common sense gun reform. Just looking at the situation and putting something in place that will hopefully deter a situation like East Lansing.
As it currently stands, it would take a felony gun charge typically to be flagged for being to be a potential risk in purchasing a gun. And in the case of the shooter last night, who was not apprehended, was approached by law enforcement just north of campus and ultimately took his own life. According to a report from Bridge, Michigan, in front of me, he was arrested in 2019 for possession of guns without a concealed carry permit. That, according to Michigan Department of Corrections spokesperson Chris Gautz. And the court records show that he was initially charged with a felony, which would have put him in a position to be flagged should he have purchased another gun, and later took a plea deal that broke that down to a misdemeanor. What are the chances of something of that sort of a situation being addressed at the legislative level as you look toward these quote-unquote common sense gun reforms that, maybe in these cases people will be calling for, well, if someone's been charged with a gun crime before and especially convicted even as a misdemeanor, why wouldn't that pop up as something that should be a red flag, if not initially, then altogether, and say this person may not be that, as you mentioned, responsible gun owner?
And Tyler, I think the priority piece of legislation that we're working on, and I know it's happening on the national level, is universal background checks. Okay, right now, Michigan has some of the weakest laws as it comes to common sense gun reform and universal background checks. If it was a requirement, if it was part of law, part of statute, maybe, just maybe, we would have caught some of the things Bridge Magazine noted in that article. But because we have so many lax policies on guns, it's loopholes that we need to close. So that's what we're working on right now. I know that it's a high priority for our caucus, and I know that it's a high priority for the governor. So I'm very optimistic. Now we will see some common sense gun reform.
I would be remiss not to briefly take the perspective of those that may not be in the same camp as you on this particular issue, particularly on the gun reform, specifically those responsible gun ownerships that do take issue with this sort of legislation being proposed, being discussed, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. What do you have to say to those individuals who are responsible gun owners, who do store their guns properly, who do utilize their guns and concealed carry properly and go through those right avenues, who may be concerned that these sort of events may lead to legislation that could be, for lack of better terms off the top of my head, restrictive to those responsible or presumably future responsible gun owners?
First of all, I'd like to thank them for being responsible gun owners and know that the legislature do recognize them as responsible gun owners, and we're doing everything we can not to infringe upon their right to enjoy their firearms for the recreational purposes that they use them for. But I want to assure them that it's not the scope of this legislation to be punitive to responsible gun owners, because we recognize that you're doing what is needed to be done by anyone that possesses a firearm, and that's to be safe with what you're doing and not cause harm or injury to innocent people.
And at this time, you do have a full majority in both chambers of the legislature. Governor Whitmer is also in your caucus on the Democratic, as a Democrat too, and gun violence, gun reform. This is a tentpole issue for your party. Given those majorities and your ability to move legislation through the processes to get them on the House and the Senate floor and get them in front of the governor, especially given what happened on Monday. How much more of a priority do these sort of common sense gun reforms, as you say, as you mentioned earlier on, how much more of a front seat do those take now, especially given the circumstances in our legislature and the urgency that the public certainly has at this time, given the tragedy in East Lansing on Monday?
Well, first of all, I want to do say that it is of extreme urgency for our caucus to move this legislation forward, but we are looking for input from the public. This is something we're actually gauging our actions from the reactions of the public. So the public is going right along with us, guiding us to what we feel or hope to have as sensible gun reform. Yes, we are anxious, but we are deliberate. So we're going to be looking at all the things that could affect this pro and con to ensure that we deliver legislation and laws that are amenable to everyone in the state of Michigan. I would just say that for my responsible gun owners, again, we need your input as well to ensure that we craft legislation that's inclusive of everyone. But know that this is of the highest priority now because it was only 14 months ago that we were here with Oxford.
Representative Carter, thank you very much for joining us. Before we let you go, I just want to give you one more opportunity to say anything you'd like to at this moment, or any lasting words for your local community, for your constituents in the 53rd District, in our local area, around the Pontiac area of southeastern Michigan, and of course to our fellow MSU alums and those in the Michigan State community.
It's rare that I get choked up like I am right now. I went to Michigan State University, and MSU campus is one of the most beautiful campuses in the world where you could be free. And I just want my fellow alums, the students at MSU, to know that you have our deepest condolences, not only for our victims and the ones that are still in the hospital, but for our students who now wake up and realize that this tragedy has happened at MSU. We are very sorry for this, and we're going to do everything we can within the legislature to stop this from happening again. Enough is enough.
Representative Carter, thank you very much for joining us.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll talk to another local leader who also is a parent of a current Michigan State student. That's coming up next. Stay tuned. This is the Megacast.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you. I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4. Now that the vaccine is available for children 5 and up, why do you recommend it?
Kids are part of the community and they can spread COVID.
We're seeing both healthy children getting sick from the virus as well as children with underlying health conditions.
They can easily bring the virus home to other people that are vulnerable and make them sick as well.
This vaccine can change that and keep children safe.
It's essential that your children get vaccinated to protect them, to protect your families, and to protect those in the community around you.
Welcome back to the Megacast. I'm Tyler Keefe. To find more information on our show on our website, keep up to date with us on civiccentertv.com/megacast as we continue today to respond to the tragedy on Monday night, February 13th, 2023 at Michigan State University, where a gunman opened fire at both Berkey Hall and the MSU Union Building and then fled on campus and around the East Lansing area, ultimately taking his own life in the face of law enforcement late into the evening. At this time, it currently stands 3 are dead from on-site at Michigan State, and 5 are in the hospital at this moment in the Sparrow Health System in the Lansing area. Joining us now is Debbie Binder, who serves during the day as the West Bloomfield Township Clerk, but day, night, and everything in between, she is a parent, and a parent of an MSU student as well. Debbie, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate you joining us too at what I can only assume is an extremely tough time for you and for other parents in the Michigan State community. Your son, Matt, is currently an MSU student. He was on campus last night as the events unfolded. Take us through your initial conversations with your son during this tragedy and your initial reactions as a concerned parent, as a mother, knowing that your son was there and there was a whole lot of uncertainty in East Lansing.
I was very fortunate, Tyler, in that I was one of the lucky parents who got a call from him right away. I didn't know about what was going on until he called. He called about 8:50 and he said, "Mom, I'm okay." And I said, "What do you mean you're okay?" And he said, "Are you watching?" And I was at dinner, so I hadn't been. And he filled me in briefly as much as he could, told me he was in lockdown in the lower level of the STEM building. We didn't know all the circumstances because obviously he couldn't talk for very long. He, said, I'll keep you posted. And then he sent another text a little bit later that he was okay and said, he said, "I can text, but I can't talk." But then the news was saying, don't text, don't call your kid. And as you're hearing that the suspect is on the loose, you don't know if they're in their school building. I mean, you don't know where that suspect is. So all of a sudden you're thinking, well, if I call him and I make his phone ring, or I text him and I make his phone ring, I better not call or text. So there was about an hour and a half where we had no communication, just hoping that he was still okay. His dad was able to track on his, find my device that he was in the same location, but you do worry. And then at the beginning, I wasn't as worried because I knew he was safe. But as time went on and the suspect was on the loose and I wasn't getting a text from him, and then you start thinking, well, I hope that his phone doesn't die. I hope it has enough charge that we can track him and he can contact us. So it was a very long evening of waiting and uncertainty. I do think the university, the deputy chief there did a really nice job keeping us informed. But again, Tyler, I recognize how lucky I was to have the information I had as a parent, because I know in watching there were parents whose kids had to run out without their cell phones, and the victims of the violence and the kids who were hurt. So I do recognize that I dealt with all the uncertainty and the concern of parenting, but I was lucky as it went for a lot of the other parents and what they were dealing with.
As you talked with your son, Matt, throughout the evening and in between periods of sheltering and learning more information as the situation developed in East Lansing, take us through a little bit of his experience from what he had mentioned to you, and as a student from his perspective, how harrowing that was and how he helped others around in his immediate surroundings and they helped him in the wake of that tragedy on campus.
He said he was in the room with about 60 kids, 60 other students, and they really relied on each other. He did say at no time did he feel unsafe, which made him feel a little bit better in the overall picture. But they did say when the police came, it took a while for them to let them in because they didn't trust that it was the police outside the door. So they did rely on each other. They did, it was about 4 hours that he was in lockdown in that basement. So it was a significant period of time. My conversations with him this morning were, his processing it very well. He understands the gravity. He understands the concern. He feels terrible for the victims. He understands they were his classmates and his friends. But he did say from where he was in the basement, he did feel like he was in a secure environment and they were able to use the training that had been in place. We do a lot of training for the uncertain, and you hope when it happens that you're ready and that training comes into play. And it sounds like that training really came into play. They got the text message right away, so they knew to go into lockdown. They were trained to barricade the doors. They implemented all of the things they had been trained over time. And it's certainly heartbreaking that these are the times we have to live in, where we worry that every time we take our child to school or our child goes to school that something can happen. But they really did seem to take their training and put it into play. And that's what he described to me from being in that classroom, also in the basement level, that they all worked together, understood the importance of protecting the room, protecting the space. And they did it, and they waited it out until the police did come to release them. And like I said, they didn't believe that they were the police right away. It took them time to let them in. So I can imagine that as he processes it more, he'll take in more details, but the conversation so far is that he's processing it, as well as can be expected as somebody who's gone through this kind of a tragedy so close to home.
We're joined on today's program by Debbie Binder from West Bloomfield Township. She is a parent of an MSU student and also serves as the West Bloomfield Township Clerk. And in your situation, we certainly feel very fortunate for you in this case that your son was safe throughout and you were able to have that communication with him, and that you are assured now that he is safe where he is at on MSU's campus. But from a parent's perspective, thinking about other parents that may not have been in as fortunate of a situation as you were during that or in the wake of that, put yourself in that perspective, Debbie, and just give us some thoughts as a parent and as someone that's very empathetic as you are, how you feel for those other parents in the MSU community that are going through what can only be imagined as a variety of different emotions at this time.
I can't even imagine the stress and the anxiety of that uncertainty. I mean, again, I knew right away, but as a parent, and your heart goes out to, excuse me, any parent, excuse me, who is in that, that waiting game. You're waiting. Even the hour and a half I was waiting to hear from him the second time, having known that he was okay before, all the things that go through your mind, and you conjure up every possible scenario, and it's easy to work yourself into a frenzy. So I can't even imagine how these parents that didn't hear from their kids, or whose kids, they were interviewing some of the students who had to run out of the classrooms or run out of a building, leaving their phone and their personal belongings behind with no way to contact a parent right away. And I just, my heart goes out to them. It goes out to that whole community. The Spartan community will be shaken, but they will also, prevail, because that's what Spartans do. But my heart just goes out to every parent who was affected, because being fortunate, I was still so unsettled and uncertain and scared that I can't even imagine the parents who didn't have that contact or even have momentary knowledge that their child was okay. It's a very, very concerning, stressful moment, and you don't have control over the situation, and what you want to do is incongruous with what they're guiding you to do, and you also understand why it's incongruous, because that having that phone call may actually create a problem, that you're putting an alert on your child's phone, yet all you want to do is know that your child is safe. So my heart goes out to every parent that is still waiting for answers, and was waiting for answers last night. It was a long night, and I'm glad that for me it had a good outcome, and my heart breaks for those who may or may not know yet that the outcome wasn't so good, or the kids. I think that a lot of the kids, the emotional toll that it's going to take on a lot of these kids who lived it, and they're interviewing students who were involved in the Oxford shooting, and now they're involved in the Michigan State shooting, and this is just not what any of us hope that our kids grow up in. And from all of the perspectives, it's a lot to process and a lot to digest. And I think we'll all be doing that over the next few weeks. And I think my son will be too. And I imagine when he reconnects with those kids, after last night, it'll be an important reunion, and possibly an important conversation that they have. But I really do think that community came together to support those kids, and that's how my son felt last night. He really did feel like the community was there for them. What really did, I will say one thing, Tyler, I think is important, that troubled him as a student. He knew the amount of misinformation that was going around. He had told me early on he heard something about the union, but when I was filling him in later on, when he was able to text again and knew he was more secure, he said he was hearing these reports about explosives and about other things, and he knew that it didn't make sense based on the space. But it's concerning that these kids who are trying to navigate a crisis situation like they were, make the best decisions they can given that crisis situation, are trying to discern what's good information and what's misinformation. So I know that misinformation again will become important in the follow-up on this, and making sure that the kids know the correct places to get that information. And I think to a degree they did, but they were still hearing all of the information being shared that they knew or thought possibly was inaccurate. So I think the important lesson, that I'm taking away is I'm going to hug them a little bit tighter. It was a long, 4 hours of parenting. And my heart goes out to the whole community and everybody else who's digesting what we're all waking up to this morning.
Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tyler.
Appreciate Debbie Binder, a parent of an MSU student, and also the West Bloomfield Township Clerk, for joining us, as well as all of our other guests on today's edition of the Megacast as we react to and learn more about the tragedy in East Lansing on Monday night. Three people on campus killed at Berkey Hall and the MSU Union. 5 others currently hospitalized in the wake of that tragedy. And we do have to go. We only have moments really left on today's edition of the program. And MSU is a special place, and it's special to me as an alum and as someone that had an opportunity to grow immensely as a person in 3.5 years on campus at Michigan State. And no community deserves this. No community deserves this, whether it's here, whether it's somewhere else in the U.S., whether it's somewhere else in the world. There isn't a community that deserves a tragedy like this, and especially not the community in East Lansing and at Michigan State. Some of the kindest, most welcoming people you will ever meet in this life of ours, and people that at the lowest points of my life, at some of my darkest moments, were always there and always welcoming. It's a place where kids should feel safe, like I felt safe with other people. Make memories that last them a lifetime for good reasons, not for bad. So let's remember that as we react and as we recover from this tragedy. Thank you for joining us today. That concludes today's edition of the Megacast.